Okay, so I forgot to hit the record button when we came back from our breakout groups. Not perfect. So I just wanted to record this information and share it with you in case you wanted to look at that as we go through that. So these were the steps related to the rest of your research program. You're on PT 867, so we're going to work on designing designing your study and selecting study approach. We'll write out a proposal. 668, 669, you'll be doing your write-ups and collecting and analyzing your data, which we'll discuss in this class. So the first draft is due on 623 after the next class. These are the three sections I want you to address: Section 1, Section 4, and Section 5. This is the points assigned to each. Hopefully your aim is starting to come together and your research questions are starting to come together. I'll try to give you feedback on that, and then you can start to work on your method section. We'll follow the IMRaD, which follows along with the scientific message. The manuscript that you're writing is going to focus mainly on the intro and methods. Results and discussions will be after you collect and analyze your data. So we'll identify the question, formulate a research question or a hypothesis, and get you ready to collect the data. You'll describe how you do that in the methods. But the statistical analysis plan will be written out and thought through, but it will be dependent on your specific question. Writing the introduction is probably one of the harder things to do. It puts the question in context to what's already known. So the introduction's purpose is to establish that framework so that your question is meaningful relative to what's already been done in the literature. So you're trying to address what gap is identified in the literature that your research question will hopefully answer. As you read an introduction, if it's well written, it should almost lead you to the obvious question. So as you work through your series of paragraphs, it's leading the reader down into the perspective of why this study is needed and what the question will be answered by doing this study. So you have to identify the problem within the introduction to make sense of why you're doing your research question. And the sooner you do that, I think the better. Try to get that in the first paragraph or two so that you can build around that as you write the rest of your introduction. So the goal of the introduction is to answer the so what question. Why do we need to do this study? It gives the relevance of your research. So a lot of you have a good question, already have some form of a question, but we need to maybe refine some of your questions. Not everybody's going to be in this boat. I think there's two really good approaches to do that. One is the PICO approach, one is using the key reference approach. Canvas, I've shared some information about how to identify a research question, and I think it's really more not so much to identify, but now you're just refining your questions because you and your advisor has sort of given you the general topic. So the PICO approach is going to be using the literature to identify what's already out there. Using a key reference article really helps you to mimic a similar approach, and it's really helpful in writing the methods, especially for any new researcher. I like to use the key reference article. I often ask my students that I work with to try to find something that's very similar. It might not be in the exact same topical area, but a similar research approach. If it's a reliability or a validity study, is it a clinical trial, so that they can see how that would be organized. A lot of times when you find a very similar article, it helps you with the methodological components. Might provide you some information on their results that you can use for your power analysis, and they might also have done some reliability. Doesn't necessarily mean your reliability will be the same, but it certainly gives you something to start with. building your introduction off previous findings or off discussions of other papers that have identified deficits makes a lot of sense. That's another thing that a key reference article can do. So when you find a good article, maybe your research question can build from a previous one that they left out a certain population or didn't address a certain component. So this is an example. One is an EMG study done in the early 90s that I mimicked in 99 when I started here at the University of Kentucky and got published. I think it's interesting when you compare the two different older articles how the research question is written. So in the first one in 92 by Mosley, they wrote a sort of general statement. The purpose of the study was to determine how the muscles were responsible for scapular motion could be best exercised. So their goal was sort of to identify which muscles are most active, but they don't really specify what analysis they're actually going to do. When I wrote my version, and I got a lot of help from my colleagues and also from the editors, I really had to do a better job of defining key statements. So the purpose of this study was to look at relationships and to determine differences across 7 weight-bearing or closed chain exercises. So it sort of identifies right then and there that I'm going to do a correlation and I'm going to look for significant differences between exercises. So as you write out your question, if you do it well, and as you refine it, you'll be able to start to ask better questions, and you almost sort of know what you're going to be able to analyze your data with. You're familiar with the PICO to formulate search strategies or to ask questions. And these videos that I've provided on the pages in Canvas are really short, takes you a total of like 15 minutes. And gives you a good example of how to do a research question. I think it's really helpful for when you get out and looking for clinical questions to organize that. So I tried to modify one of the examples for the ICU study that was going on. The population would be patients in the ICU, whatever your intervention might be, and then the outcome. You had multiple outcomes, but mortality or stay in hospital might be of interest. I'm going to give you an example of an ankle sprain. So in patients with ankle sprain, which treatment is more effective at reducing swelling? Could be pain, could be a different outcome, but in this case we were focusing on a physical measure of swelling. So what are the specific questions? So what is the patient population? Do I want to start broad? Do I want to be very specific? Sometimes if you're too specific, you don't find much data. Sometimes if you start too broad, you're like getting everything. Is there particular types of patients that you're interested in? What's the intervention? Not everybody's going to do an intervention. Some people are going to do descriptive studies, so they might have a different variable in here instead of an intervention. They might not have any comparison. They might just say, what is the barriers of toward physical therapy in a rural population? Well, there's not really an intervention in that, so you might have to identify your components without an I or a C. You might use different terms there. Outcomes can be general or specific. It's much better if you know exactly what outcome you want to measure. You might not know what outcome you want to measure, but you might try to identify one or two that are relatively straightforward to start with. And if you don't have exactly what you want, you can always rerun your search. Searching the literature is relatively short. It probably can be done in an hour or less if you have an organized approach. These are Boolean operators. They work on PubMed and Medline and a lot of the different typical search strategies. It doesn't work in Google because it just recognizes terms, but these and ors or nots and these wildcards are really helpful as you're doing your search to be expanding your search or reducing and tightening up your search. So this is an example for the ankle sprain. I would do 4 separate searches, a P, an I, a C, and an O. using ORs to expand and use synonyms of words. And then after I do those 4 individual searches, I do an AND. So I combine the first search with the second search with the third search to now try to reduce that information. I'm going to give a little plug here for UK's database resources. I'm a big fan of EBSCOhost. I sign in. It allows me to do searches to be stored and run. I can rerun searches at any time, change the dates. I can look under different headings. Medline, Senhall, and Sports Discus are all different databases that are indexing different journal articles. Not every article in physical therapy is in Medline. So sometimes you have to look in other databases to find relevant topics. Endnote is a big software tool that I use a lot. Helps me analyze and has sort of like my own little PubMed. You need to be careful when you download data from EBSCOhost. I would do one type of database at a time. So if I do a search in Medline, Senhall, and Sports Discus all at once, I'm trying to be efficient, I can really mess up my EndNote library when I try to import those in directly. I would recommend doing one search at a time, Medline, then Senhall, then Sports Discus, to help you organize that if you're exporting that data into EndNote. If you're not going to export the data in EndNote, you can be efficient and do a quick search and look at all of those together. Just don't import them into your EndNote. Scopus and Cochrane are other databases. Scopus is a part of Elsevier, which is probably one of the largest publishers of medical literature. So it references a lot of their journal articles, which might or might not be duplicated in some of the other, but it captures quite a bit of medical literature. And Cochrane, which is a organization for systematic reviews and clinical trials, is yet another search strategy you can use to try to get information as you go through those databases. So this is just a single database Medline search for our PICO question. So you can sort of see I did the 4 independent with all the ORs first, and then search strategy 5 was combining the 4 independent to reduce my number down. So I got a pretty good comprehensive search with that. What I would do is I would look at those 11 articles, I'd probably export those into my EndNote database, and then I would change this database to Sports Discus, rerun all of those searches and see if I got some different information, and do that over and over again. Like I said, it takes a little bit of time, but it's very efficient with all the electronic databases now. When you leave UK, you're not going to have access to all the same research databases, but things that you can use for the rest of your life. PubMed Central, which has full text articles. It's not as big as PubMed, but at least you get the full article. Google Scholar, some are free text, but not all. So sometimes you'll get an abstract, sometimes you will get the full article depending on where it was published. Certainly using your libraries in your community are very helpful. And then one trick is to become a clinical educator for a university. That is one perk that you get as being a clinical educator, is that you often get access to their library resources. If they don't offer that, you could ask for them and say, hey, I'll be happy to take on a student if you give me library accesses. I know we do that at UK. The other component, instead of you having to reach out and search the literature, you can get data pushed to you. That makes it a little bit more efficient. So PubCrawler, this is the web page that you would have to type into your browser, and then you could sign up to be on PubCrawler. You can set the same search strategies you want, and that constantly pushes information. This is really nice after you've done your big search, if you want to stay current and have that updated daily or weekly as new information comes out. Often If you're interested or you find that a lot of your articles that are relevant or something in a topic matter, a journal of interest will also send you a table of contents monthly or however often it comes out, and can be something for you to review. Takes you a minute to sort of see if there's anything relevant. This is what I get once a day. I have a couple of searches, one on push-ups and pull-ups, one on return to sports. Those are my hits. I got 7 in one on the pull-up. I just cut and pasted this information. I just look through it. I click on one that I'm interested in. It gives me an abstract, and then I can decide if I want to go get the full article and read it or not. Importing citations and PDFs and Endnote. So I've created another video to demonstrate this for single references and also for multiple PDFs. So hopefully you can find that in managing references for a manuscript. I've demonstrated all of those. If you have questions, feel free to contact me. When you get your data, then you have to actually extract it. And so my recommendation is to sort of grid that information. Keep it in a single location so everybody can access it. Extracting data into tables helps sort of keep all the information organized. So I use all the columns as a way to organize all my headings, and I find this really helpful as it facilitates me as I'm writing, because all the information is centralized. I don't have to go back and look at each article individually. This is an example of gridding information. This is a publication of a systematic review, but it's basically the same headings that we extracted the data of interest. So we looked at the title, or I'm sorry, the citation. We just give the author and then we reference that. That's one of the beauties of Endnote. The demographics of the participants, the key outcomes of interest like the sports, the surgical procedures. Were they able to get back to return to sports with those bits of information? We can also capture some of the statistical data. This could be all continuous in one big document. So looking at were they able to go to full return or no return, limited return, what was their odds compared to another group, like overhead versus non-overhead, thrower versus non-thrower, whatever the individual study did. I've also seen it done in rows versus columns, so that your headings are in the one individual column and then your information shows up in rows. This might make it a little harder as you're screening that data, but you could potentially organize your data to write it out that way. Everybody sort of does things in whatever work, but I do think it's better than highlighting to actually read the literature with a question, go and write down what you found, to record the participants, record the outcome, record a key methodological variable, whatever it is. I always tell students to extract more than they need. You can always ignore that down the road. If you have topics like outcome score or strength measures, I would add more rows as I got different information from different scales. So an outcome score on a lower extremity functional score is not graded the same as a COOS. So instead of just having one heading with outcomes, I might have 5 headings of outcome scores because they're all scored a little bit different. Some studies do multiple outcomes, some studies only report one bit of information. But by using columns, it allows me to add as much as I need to. And I'm a big fan of using Excel because of all the filtering capabilities within that. So hopefully you've remembered to do this. Create a search strategy approach with your group. Whether you use a key article or a PICO, that's up to you. I would recommend a PICO. Don't forget to use synonyms. So if you're interested in a particular topic like cryotherapy, don't think just cryotherapy. Think of other synonyms like cold pack or infrared or ice packs. Once you do your search, you could have everybody take a few articles. You could also have different team members use the same search strategy. One person does sports discus, one person does Synhall, one person does PubMed, whatever. Decide what you're going to extract, And then this should give you plenty of articles to review and build your background and methodology. Right, so next class we're going to talk about writing an introduction, how to identify a problem. The identification of a problem results in suggesting a solution, therefore the question that you're going to answer. That's the research question. We'll talk a little bit about study designs also. I want you to read the article by Philip Page and read the article by Tim Wright related to how to write an introduction and how to write methods. I also want you to download Endnote, try to load 5 references, and let me know if you have any problems or questions with that. I understand everybody's got a different capability on their computer, so you as a group might find out that one person's computer handles Endnote better than the other. However, I would really encourage you to use Endnote because that is definitely a tool you can use for the rest of your professional career. Thanks.